We're here, finally.
Nice to see you, Gleam.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Neighbor?
Yeah, actually, it was a long 2-block walk.
It was very far, I know. It was very far, and that's probably the convenience and the beauty being here in Ocean Park, but part of the Santa Monica community.
Absolutely. I've lived a lot of different places in Santa Monica, and most of them have some walkable component. You know, you can stop off, grab a coffee, see your neighbor. Always a good thing to do.
I see you got the Cafe K Latte.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They got probably the best coffee. I'm always promoting Cafe K.
No. Well, it's right down the street from us, so it's a standard in our household.
Yeah, I think they have some of the best coffee in town. We're excited to be here today on Meyerside Chats, and the real purpose of being here is to talk not necessarily about getting in the weeds on every issue, but to talk at a high level about, I want to say, politics in general.
Great.
And the state of affairs and how we can make things better, how we can all just work through problems together. A lot of this stems from the idea of something we've discussed before, actually, which is distrust in general. Now, that happens at every level. It happens at all levels of politics. But at local politics, do you believe that same thing is happening? And do you believe there's something we can do about it? And how can we start to explore what the solutions to create a more cohesive and less polarized space?
Well, let's start at the back of your question. We clearly are in a polarized space here at the local level. And we do have a tremendous amount of distrust in local government. There's distrust in government at all levels, and it extends to local government. We're not immune from whatever it is that is causing that distrust. And certainly the current situation with COVID, which causes people to become more isolated, crankier, in all honesty. I say there is a real COVID crankiness. We all suffer from it. So I think that distrust has only been exacerbated by what we've been going through over the last couple of years. How do we solve it? I wish I had a magic wand. I think that at its most basic level, the important thing to do is recognize that people can disagree with you, and it's an honest disagreement. We have a tendency to say, oh, if you don't agree with me, it must be because you've been bought off, you're corrupt, you're stupid, you're whatever. And to sort of say, no rational, well-thinking person could disagree with me, and therefore there's something wrong with you.
Right.
And I think when you come from that position where I have the righteous position and no one else can be honest and disagree with me from an equally, in their mind, righteous position, then we're never going to be able to talk to each other. Because it's just easy to say, oh, well, you're corrupt, I dismiss what you think. Or of course you would say that. You were bought off, whether it's by the developers or by whomever, the police, the fire unions, you were bought off by the unions. Whoever it is that you're not in sync with, it's just too easy to dismiss other people's opinions as having some validity. And if you just assume that they're coming from a not well thought out place and not an honest place. So I think that's one of the things we really need to do is recognize that reasonable people can disagree about very controversial matters. Clearly, for example, housing is an issue. And there's a whole range of opinions people have about housing. And if you accept that the people who have those varying opinions come to it from a place where they are in their own mind, saying this is what I believe, this is what I think is best for the community, then you can have that discussion. I mean, it's just that simple, really. It's thinking better of people, not the worst of people, that I think will help us get over that distrust problem.
Right. Well, sometimes I have to imagine they have examples in their head that perhaps they project onto everybody, right? Like there's been cases probably in the past that they're thinking about somewhere, somehow. Maybe they're projecting federal politics onto local politics. Maybe they think that all people in politics are the same. I don't know exactly, but I'm wondering if we start to understand what those reasons are, if we can then make them better. and soothe them a bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, look, politicians at every level, including the local level, have not done themselves any favor. I mean, it's rare now to not open up a digital newspaper. I'm old enough to think about paper newspapers as well.
They still have those?
Yeah, every once in a while. Every once in a while, I pick one up just for the sensory feeling of holding it in my hands. But yeah, it's rare not to hear about this, that, or the other scandal. Whether it's at the local level. I mean, certainly the city of LA, seems to be in the midst of having a scandal a day contest.
Right.
And it's not just here in Southern California. It's certainly at the federal level if you turn on the news. So yeah, I think politicians have not done themselves a lot of favors by embroiling themselves in situations where they become suspect, and that helps create that suspicion. But I also think that we also live in a constitutional democracy where people are innocent until proven guilty, and so I think that sort of assuming that someone disagrees with you because they're corrupt when you have no evidence of corruption is problematic. And if we can sort of start to put that aside and start to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I may disagree with you, but I trust that what you're saying is something that you firmly believe in an honest, forthright manner, and you need to listen to me in the same way, we can at least maybe start to nibble around the edges of that trust issue.
Right.
But we'll have to see.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to figure out how to collect that information. Right?
Yeah. Well, part of the problem is, and you and I have spoken about this before, is that we don't have a lot of really good structures for having that kind of interchange. City council meetings are open to the public, but because they are meetings and they have long agendas and things need to be accomplished, public input is, if you're a member of the public, relatively limited. You get your 2 minutes to speak and that's it. You can certainly send emails. You can certainly ask, to speak to any of the council members or anyone else who whether it's a school board member, rent control board member, we all have, they're our constituents and we should speak with them. But the opportunities for sort of public, honest discourse are very limited. And when we have things like these public meetings about whether it's about a development project or a proposal for this, that, or the other thing, people come to them with agendas. And sometimes that agenda is just to be disruptive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think one of the challenges we have is how do we better increase public discourse, which is something like this can help. You and I can have a conversation, and there may be people out there going, ugh, but maybe, if they bear with us for a bit, they'll start to say, okay, we can have that conversation. So I think anything that gets that public discourse in a more tempered, rational, less fighters going to their corners and more people coming to a table trying to collaborate manner will make a big difference.
Yeah. And I guess seeing that there's people behind, that dais,
Mm-hmm, sure.
right? They are humans with families.
We are.
Right.
Yeah, every one of us, yes, is a human being. We all can pass the CAPTCHA test, identify the cones and the squares, that
That's
sort
good.
of thing.
Yeah, is the CAPTCHA test a requirement when you join council?
It isn't, but maybe it should be.
Yeah, and perhaps even the opportunity to just, sometimes I think about what it takes to be on council, and should there be some sort of requirement of like, okay, we need to be able to solve problems together. We come here together to work together to solve problems. That's the purpose. There's a board here, and this board of directors, in a sense, needs to be able to work together, and we need to be able to hear all sides of the story. We need to be able to listen to community feedback. But once it gets, and I found this with every side, of every aspect of life, is once it gets into an emotional yelling match, wherever that's coming from, or if people are really are digging their heels in without active listening, the conversation doesn't end up moving forward easier. It takes longer, and it's harder, and it's more emotionally driven. And I'm wondering, I guess to some degree, what can we do to keep that objective and keep it a solutions-oriented approach?
Well, you identified it at the very beginning of that question, which is, can we all just agree that our job here is to do what's best for the city? People have questioned many of my votes in the years I've been on the council, and how did you do that, or why did you come to that decision? And I always say the same thing, which is when I'm deciding how I'm going to vote on whatever the issue is, my analysis, and I listen to everybody, isn't is this best for you, or is this best for the neighborhood, or is this best for this group of people or that group of people. I try and take it up to a higher level and say, is this really best for Santa Monica as a whole? And my reasoning for doing that is that I think we're going to move forward in the most beneficial, prosperous, meaningful way if we all think about us in the larger community. You know, I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many times when there's been a project or a proposal or a ballot measure, and people have said, well, what's in it for me? And sometimes the answer is nothing, but it's good for the community.
Right.
And so if we can all sort of agree that doing what's best for the community is what we've been sent there to do by the people, and we all come from different constituencies. It's just like anything else. Some people voted for some people and didn't vote for others. But at the end of the day, now that we're all on council, every single person who lives, works, visits Santa Monica is in some way our constituent.
Right.
Even the person who hates my guts, who would never vote for me in a million years, who thinks I am the most evil, Satan-worshiping person in the world, that's my constituent. And so once we sort of say, okay, this isn't about settling old scores or righting old wrongs, this is about making decisions about what are best for the community as a whole, not this neighborhood versus that neighborhood or this person versus that person, but does this benefit the community as a whole? If we start with that fundamental premise, I think we can find more common ground. But I'm not sure we're all starting from that fundamental premise.
Got it. So when it comes to thinking about the community as a whole, what does that means the most amount of good for the most amount of people.
Right.
A utilitarian approach, I think, is one word to describe it. Do you think that if we were able to, for example, start with the things we agree on, right? There's so much we all agree on. Really, everyone here, I do believe 99% of the people in Santa Monica agree that we live in one of the best communities in the world. That we're very privileged to be in a place called Santa Monica, that has a beach so close to us, that has wonderful main streets and promenades, and that has a great education system, great hospitals, everything. Really, it's a wonderful place for a million reasons. And it's got plenty of problems, like any community.
Sure.
And those problems are relative to the community that you live in and what you're dealing with at the time. And on the other hand, we all agree that homelessness is a big issue, right? We all understand the issue of housing, whether we agree that the approach is the right approach to take in the specific way that it's done. I think most people would agree that, sure, people need places to live.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone wants their children to have a good education, likely go to college, right? They care deeply about their children. And I think they do care about the well-being of their community in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think that's right. I think everybody, you know, if you have children, you care about building a community for your children. If you have grandchildren, you care about them. But even if you don't have children, you care about building a better community for yourself, the people that will come after you. I'm very bad with adages, but it's the old, you plant the seeds today for the tree that grows tomorrow. And sometimes that's what we do, is we get too short-sighted about, if you do this, this bad thing is going to happen to me tomorrow. But maybe if you do this, in 5, 10, 15 years, something wonderful will come from it. I'll give a completely non-Santa Monica example, so that way people won't yell at me too much, which is there's a place where I used to live in Arlington, Virginia, when I worked at the Department of Justice. And they set aside, they embarked on a 25-year plan to reduce traffic, to secure economic prosperity, to do this whole series of things that this part of Arlington, Virginia wanted to do, because they had a new metro stop coming. And they wanted to not just say, okay, there's a metro stop, that's nice, but really embrace it, build around it. And they came up with a 25-year plan, and it took 25 years. But at the end of that plan, and I sort of followed it because it was of great interest to me, they found that because they had built a little more densely around the Ballston, Virginia stop, traffic actually went down. In the short term, maybe traffic went up because you were building more densely, more people were driving. But as you got to that tipping point where people realized they didn't need 2 cars in the family, or they didn't even need 1 car, maybe they could use a zip car.
Yeah.
They could use the metro more often, and there were more amenities close by, so they didn't need a car to get to the grocery store, or the pharmacy, or whatever. And they built this complete community, and actually over time, traffic went down. But it took a time, because they were thinking forward, not just what will this do tomorrow, but what will this do 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And I think that's hard for people to do. We're all into immediate gratification.
Right.
What is this going to mean for me now?
And it's also how you look at it, right? If that's not conveyed, say, for something, whatever the thing that you're building or doing or not building or not doing, then it's hard to look at it a year later and go, oh, I'm seeing effects of something right now, but that doesn't mean that the long-term effect, I'm rooting for the long-term effect of why this decision was made, of why people made a certain decision of and again, either way, whatever that is. It's hard to be in the moment and go, no matter where you are, even when you're, whatever point of life you're at or whatever news you read, it's very momentary. See? See, I knew it. That's why those, but there's usually a strategy. And maybe that's a good kind of takeaway, is the forest from the trees, in a sense, is not always looked at when people are walking down the street and pointing things out about problems.
Yeah, I think that's important, that you think about the larger picture. That goes back to my whole, is it good for Santa Monica as opposed to this corner, But I also think, so it's forest for trees. I think it's not today but tomorrow. I always tell people that as I'm analyzing what we're doing in Santa Monica, I always say we are not trying to recreate the Santa Monica of 1950, but build the Santa Monica of 2050. Yeah. You have to always be looking forward, because whether you like it or not, change is inevitable. And the question is, how do we manage that change to our own benefit? Again, to the benefit of the community as a whole. If you try and stop change, all that happens is you make a mess. And we've seen communities that have tried to stop change, and then it makes a mess. So you sort of have to accept the inevitability of it, and then say, okay, how are we going to manage that? Yeah. And you need to emotionally embrace it. Lots of times these are emotional decisions. Or is my corner store going to be there? Is my neighbor going to be there? And you have emotions tied up in that. And it's good that people are passionate about things. I never want to discourage people from being passionate, but they also have to be able to take a step back and think about it dispassionately as well, and say, okay, maybe this isn't best for me in the short term because there will be construction next door to me, and I don't like constructions. It's noisy, it's dusty, but what will be there at the end will be a much better building, that will service more people or provide better services or something. So it's hard. It's hard to sort of step back and think about the future and accept that there might be some short-term disadvantages that will lead to long-term betterment. But we all can do that, and we all struggle with it every day. But I really want to emphasize what you said, which is we are so lucky to live in Santa Monica. And yes, we have some problems, the problems of our unhoused neighbors, the problems of certain types of crime, by the way, which are problems not unique to Santa Monica. And I don't say that as an excuse, but to point out that it's not as if we're doing something in particular that is causing them. They are societal problems. Right. They're regional problems, but you can...
And this is a particularly favorable place to be.
Well, it's funny. Just the other day, I did another ride along with Ron Hooks, who does West Coast Care and does the outreach on the beach. And we were talking about this very issue, and he does ask people, how did you end up in Santa Monica? Because he's trying to reconnect them with their families and things like that. And he goes, 9 times out of the 10, they say, it's where the bus line ended. It's where the 10 freeway ends. If you're in downtown Los Angeles and you want to head west because it's cooler out here, it's nicer, the air is fresher, at some point you run out of room, and you run out of room in Santa Monica. And that is our blessing and our curse. It's our blessing because, as you say, we have this beautiful beach, we have this wonderful environment, and yet we are still very connected to our region. You know, I can hop on the Expo train and go see a play at the Amundsen or go see a hockey game at Crypto.com Arena without having to use my car. Which, as if I lived in some of the other beach communities, Pacific Palisades or Manhattan Beach, much harder to do that. So it's the benefit and the curse. The benefit is that we can be part of the larger regional environment without having to necessarily incur, oh God, I got to get in my car and drive 2 hours. But by the same token, it does make it easier for people to get here. So on 4th of July weekend, a lot of people in the region come here and spend the day with us.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. It reminds me, there's a lot of times I've heard different comparisons around, well, why don't we do it like Beverly Hills does it? I'm sure you've heard this one, right? Who has different ways of looking at their community, of things they allow and don't allow. And then, of course, there's comparisons to us, like cities like Santa Barbara, right? Geographically, population-wise, there's some sister city type behavior there. How do you look at when we're solving these? What cities do you look at as good examples? Are those some that are to do or not to do based on how their approach or things? Are there a few point cities that you use as an example to help make decisions?
There's no one city I look at and go, they're doing everything right, let's just copy them.
Yeah.
Because there is no one city that's doing everything right. And that doesn't, has somehow cracked the nut on all these problems. We are like many cities, but we are also very different. I mean, as I just mentioned, our geography is really unique to us. It's funny, you think, well, there's another city, down the road, El Segundo or Manhattan Beach, and they don't have any of the same problems. They also don't have as much transit. They don't have as much walkability. They're smaller cities. They're more homogenous cities. And so are they doing things that maybe we can borrow from? Sure. I mean, we hear a lot. It's interesting. Beverly Hills is a perfect example. Because they have, for example, a lot of tall buildings in Beverly Hills. And when development issues come up, I get a lot of, we don't want to be Beverly Hills by the sea. And yet when people say, well, but they don't have the same degree of people living on their streets that we do. We want to be just like Beverly Hills.
Right. Yeah. You want them for some things, but not for the other things.
Right. And it's sort of interesting. There are differing reasons. I mean, one of the reasons, and by the way, Beverly Hills does have a problem with unhoused people. They are surrounded on all sides effectively by the city of LA, and they have somehow figured out a way to make that LA's problem, not their own.
Mm-hmm. I've seen them on board, at least on the border.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to do a pretty good job of sort of,
like right on the edge.
But one of the things, for example, and this was discussed in open, that was one of the reasons they didn't want public transit. They didn't want the subway to come through Beverly Hills because it would bring those people. They fought very much and continue to fight for bus rapid transit. They don't want bus rapid transit lanes in Beverly Hills because then people might, get off at those stops, that sort of thing. So,
right.
So if you want to isolate yourself and say, okay, the only way I'm going to get out of my city is to get in a car, that probably will make it harder for people who don't have cars to come to your city.
Right.
And maybe if that's a value judgment that you as a city make, that's okay. I think what we need to always focus on is what are Santa Monica values, and that's a good area maybe to find some common ground. For me, for example, I really believe that most people in Santa Monica look at our unhoused neighbors and think, therefore, by the grace of God, go I. That these are human beings that for whatever reason have ended up in a situation that none of us would want to be in. Nobody grows up, and you don't ask a 5-year-old kid and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say a homeless person, right? People don't become homeless because that's their goal in life. And so if we start, one, from the recognition that these are human beings, two, that whatever failures we want to attribute to them, and some people look at homeless people and think, oh, they failed. Those are societal failures. Those aren't individual failures. We failed them. Our social safety net didn't catch them before they fell into deep mental illness or addiction issues or whatever, or economic issues. Right now we have a lot of people on our streets who are economically homeless. They just can't afford rents. So if we start that our Santa Monica values are that these are human beings, that it is going to take collective effort to address their issues, that we can't just say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, because they don't have any boots. Right? So it's going to take collective effort on our part. And if we say we are not just going to do this in a humane and legal way, but in a way that is really designed to solve the problem rather than move it out of our sight. Because that, to me, is the biggest challenge right now with homelessness. And I know you don't want to get in the weeds, but I think a lot of people are just, I don't want to see it. I live in Santa Monica. I pay good money in my taxes. I don't want to see homeless people on the streets. And I am totally sympathetic to that. I don't either. None of us want to, because, again, it's soul-crushing. But is the solution to say, okay, so let's move them all out to the Inland Empire, which people have in all seriousness said. So at least I don't have to look at them, maybe someone else does. Or is the solution to solve homelessness?
Right.
To get them homes. That's what homelessness is, by definition, the lack of a home.
Yeah.
And so that is, if we can sort of say that one of our values is not to make it someone else's problem or move it out of our sight, but instead to actually solve the problem. I tell people it's like cleaning your house, right? You're either going to clean your house or you're just going to take the muss and shove it under the bed and deal with it another day. And we want to really solve the problem and not just move it as make it someone else's problem or move it out of our sight, because that's the humane thing to do. It's the morally right thing to do, and it's really the only effective thing to do. Because I guarantee you, if you could legally, and you can't, but if you could legally put people on a bus and say, you know what, you all live in Chino Hills now, they'll be back. Again, because we're at the end of the 10 freeway. Yeah. So you're not solving that problem, you're not solving our problem. So let's focus on solutions, not short, it goes back to short-term fixes. Yeah. Short-term fixes that maybe make us all feel better, but in the long term don't solve the problem.
Right. Well, I guess on that note, while we're here on this topic, something that I guess always occurred to me is how do we make sure that housing doesn't become a short-term problem? Mm-hmm. Because you could see how eventually, if you don't solve the root of the problem, then you just need more housing forever. Sort of like building more freeway lanes.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, well, I think two things. And one is that, and I had this discussion with someone just the other day. They said they were opposed to building this proposal we have for where parking structure 3 is to build deed-restricted affordable housing and permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless people. But we don't want those people living in downtown. I said, they already live there. They just live there without homes. So let's have them live in homes, which will be better for them, better for our businesses, better for the community. So I think we need to understand that there isn't really this induced demand. I mean, there's this concept of induced demand. If you build another lane on the freeway, people go, oh, look, more lanes on the freeway, so now I can drive, and I didn't drive before.
Yeah.
That doesn't work quite so well with housing, because most people only need one home. Maybe the ultra-rich have many homes, but most of us only have one home. And so once someone gets housed, they're not going to say, oh, look, more housing, let's build it so I can have a second home. That's not the issue. I think what is the issue is the recognition that we can't build a wall around Santa Monica. We can't build a wall around Southern California, nor should we. I mean, I don't know what your background is. My parents came to California after World War II. And were welcomed with open arms. But what if the people in 1946 California said, oh no, we don't want those people from Michigan coming here, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why should it be any different now? When people say, I grew up in Nebraska, but I want to go live in California, one of the things that makes the state so vibrant is we have such a diverse and population, and we've been so welcoming to people from everywhere. And I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So we don't want to build walls. We don't want to say, okay, this many and no more. I'm not a native Santa Monican. I've lived here a very long time, but I'm not native. In 1986 when I moved here, they said, oh no, I'm sorry, no one from Washington, D.C. can come here, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think, around the issue of housing, what we need to recognize is that, especially for something that's expensive to build like housing, you're almost never going to build too much of it. No one's going to build housing and say, let's just build a ton of it and see if people will move into it, because it's expensive to build, but they will build to meet the need. And I think one of the things that we have to do as a community and as a region is recognized. Nope, it's not as if everyone can live in Santa Monica. That's not going to happen. No more than everyone can live in Culver City or everyone can live in Beverly Hills. But we do have to recognize that we are, as a region, a job center, and people not only want to, but should be able to live near their jobs. They won't have to be on the freeway for 2 hours, spewing gas out the back of their tailpipe, missing time with their family. You're a new father. Believe me, you're going to want every second with that baby.
I feel that already.
Exactly. But imagine if you had a 2-hour commute.
Yeah.
Right? You'd be, oh my God, I'm missing 2 hours with my baby now.
Yeah.
So we need to come up with regional strategies so that as we're a job center, and I've heard people say, well, let's just move the jobs out to the Inland Empire. I'm sorry, we're a tourist community. We've been a tourist community for 100 years. Unless you're going to pick up the whole doggone beach and move the beach to the Inland Empire, the jobs are going to be here.
Yeah.
And so people are going to need to live in this region, and we need to figure out how to do that. And I believe that we can. I will say this, it's real interesting. The world has changed. In the 60s and the 70s, it used to be that large corporations would establish their headquarters in places and people would go there for the jobs. A classic example being IBM established this huge campus in Armonk, New York. Who knew where Armonk was? But all of a sudden it became this boom town. Everyone who worked at IBM moved to Armonk. With technology, you don't need to do that now. So people, smart people like you, young people getting out of college, they don't say, okay, I got a job, I have to move to where my job is. They try to decide, where do I want to live? And then find a job that lets them live there, whether it's working remotely or it's a job nearby.
Right.
And so desirable places like Santa Monica are always going to be popular. And I think we just need to accept that the west side of Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, Culver City, Manhattan Beach, whatever, including Santa Monica, Pacific Palisades, people are going to say, I want to live there, and we're going to need to accept the fact that we're going to have to provide housing.
Yeah. And you brought up something else that's interesting, which is in terms of cities working together, right? And this is something even at the micro mobility level that I've experienced, and I'm a huge scooter fan. I think they're very important. My background's in transportation, as you know. And although most people know me as the art guy,
you can be the art guy and the transportation guy.
I have so much background in that, and so when scooters, came out, of course they've had issues, and like everything does when it first comes out. But the one thing that is going to be harder to fix, other than better kickstands, and not turning it off when you're on the sidewalk, is things like when you're riding a scooter from Santa Monica from Venice to Santa Monica, and then your scooter dies when you have to get to your home in Santa Monica or your job or whatever. So now you have a mode of transportation that only worked part of the way, that you now have to stop, get a new mode of transportation. Hopefully a scooter is just right there where it died, that you can just pick up and go, but it's often not. And then you usually have to back it out so you can park it in the right place. So that's an example at the micro mobility level. That happens in many ways. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that, and what can we do to communicate better between cities so these types of things can be addressed more productively?
Well, you're absolutely right. We live in a region. Imagine if you only could ride Big Blue bus to the city line, and then you had to get off and go catch a metro bus, right? You go, but I need to go 5 blocks into LA.
Right.
That's right. So interoperability of the systems, whether it's a scooter system, a bus system, is key. And that's why, when we were doing the scooter pilot, and I didn't win this vote, that happens in a democracy. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That for me, we should at least be including in our pilot those companies that also are able to operate in LA, because we are connected on 3 times to LA. And just as you say, if someone starts out, if they live in Venice and they work in Santa Monica, the idea that they can't ride a scooter from Venice to Santa Monica because that scooter company isn't authorized to operate in one or the other doesn't make any sense. So I think that's something we need to work on. And I think it's an interoperability of all transit systems. And I think this happens for 2 reasons. Let me just say that. One is that we are still thinking like car-centric people. In other words, if you had a car and we said, okay, but your car can only operate in Santa Monica, and the second you go to LA, you have to go get a different car. People would go, you're crazy, we're not going to do that. And yet we're willing to do it with scooters.
Right.
Because we don't think of scooters as valid transportation.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I'm trying to do in my own life.
Or buses here.
Right. Is
Yeah.
get rid of this notion of that it's alternative transportation. As though somehow our main form of transportation is cars and everything else is sort of secondary.
Yeah, that's interesting. The language hasn't been updated.
No. I think it's all transportation.
Yeah.
And I think it should all stand on an equal footing. It should all have an equal right to our public space. It should all have an equal right to operate within our public space. And I think that is part of getting away from this idea that cars are the end all and be all. And look, I drive. I have a car, I drive, but I'm very conscious about trying to drive as little as possible. One of the reasons we moved to Ocean Park is because it's so much more walkable. And I think that over time, people will discover that, you know, maybe you go from being a 2-car family to a 1-car family. Or maybe you drive the 1 car you have 2/3 less than you used to, that sort of thing. It's not about getting rid of the cars. Yes, I understand. You need to go to the grocery store, the dry cleaner, or whatever. But if you can drive less,
right,
that's really good for the environment. It's good for the community. It's less traffic. It's less pollution. And in all honesty, the more you walk, the more you use these other more human level types of transportation, the more you interact with human beings, which is always a good thing.
More human level activity means better well-being.
Well, and it's good for the economy, by the way. There are now a lot of studies coming out that show that when people switch from driving, let's do Main Street in Santa Monica, the people who drive down Main Street in Santa Monica are not paying attention to the stores that are on Main Street because they're in a 2,000-pound metal machine, and they need to be paying attention to where are the pedestrians and that sort of thing. But someone who's walking by can stop and go, wow, look at that. Let's go in that store. That's interesting. It's better for the economy. They've done studies in Europe, they've done studies in New York that show that when you get people out of the cars and in other forms of transportation, whether it's scooters, even buses, because again, when you're in the bus, you're not the one driving it, that they notice more about what's on the street and they become intrigued by it and they begin to interact with it.
Right.
So that's really important. So that's the one thing I would say is we need to stop thinking about scooters and these other things as sort of alternative forms of transportation and think if we wouldn't do it for cars, why are we doing it for them?
It's a good takeaway. Maybe we can think about how to even begin that language shift in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
It's not alternative transportation. It's transportation.
Right.
You have different modes, and cars is one of them for certain activities.
Right. I think the second thing is, and I think this is a little harder for people to wrap their heads around, but I think we will over time, is that it goes back sort of to my personal versus community responsibility discussion, which is it's more convenient for me to get in a car and drive, right? That my car is at my house. I don't have to wait for my car like I would have to wait for a bus. I get in my car. I drive to exactly where I need to be. I don't have to walk. It lets me off right in front of where I need to be. I park my car and it's there when I'm coming out. You know, so I don't have to wait. It's more convenient. And obviously one of the things government needs to do, and this is not just Santa Monica government, all government everywhere needs to do, is make all sorts of transport more convenient, whether it's making sure there are scooters readily available, that the buses come more frequently, that people feel safe when they're on the bus, that we look, you know, one of the things I keep trying to do is figure out a way, and I call them the coconut shuttle, those little electric shuttles that go up and down Main Street to the hotels and up in Montana. Is there a way to maybe make them citywide? So that someone in the Pico neighborhood who says, you know what, I want to go see a movie downtown, because they have an app. You hit the app and say, come get me, right? But they don't operate there now. So how do we expand people's options so that they don't have to drive and it's equal, but it's convenient for them? I mean, one of the reasons people say, I don't ride the bus, I don't want to stand there and wait for it, it's not convenient, whatever. So we need to elevate, we need to make that calculus different. You know, one of the things that I've always said is we need to get rid of monthly parking fees. And you should have to pay by the day. Because if I pay, just to pick a number out of my head, $200 a month for parking, and I get up in the morning and I'm like, okay, well, I've already paid for the parking, so I might as well drive.
Yeah.
But if I haven't already paid for the parking, well, you know what, it's a nice day. I wouldn't mind walking a little bit, or I wouldn't mind waiting for the bus for a few minutes. And I don't have anything really pressing, so I can maybe be have it take 10 minutes longer for me to get to work. So we need to change that calculus that people are making in their minds about it. So we have an obligation to make transit at all levels more convenient for people. It'll never be as convenient as driving, but if it's more convenient, more people will use it. And I think the other thing we need to do is change that economic calculus. People don't, I think one of the really interesting things, one of the things I've had, people don't understand how very expensive it is to own a car. It's not just the price of the car, it's the insurance, it's the wear and tear, the money you pay for gas.
Repairs.
Repairs. Yeah. The land you have to set aside to park your car, whether it's taking land on your property to build a garage or, which has a value to it. Mm-hmm. It is very expensive to own a car. And a lot of people could find housing to be more affordable if they didn't have the additional expense of owning a car.
Yeah, it's the second biggest expense most people have, right?
So I think that, we need to get people to rethink about the economics of transportation, the convenience of transportation. Yeah. City, region has an obligation to make transit more effective, but we also have to educate people about, the cost that they're paying for that convenience. Is that extra 5 minutes really worth an extra $500 a month?
Yeah, well, when automated cars become real for all of us, it'll start to force the hand of policy, I believe, because that's a reality. Yeah. Which is both scary and really exciting.
Like all technology
like all
is, right?
Yeah, but, it won't be, I think the number is something like, you can't implement something of that kind of drastic change until it's like 10 times safer than what people are used to or familiar with. But it's not even just that. So let's just say you get the car and it's like the infrastructure around what that's going to create is just crazy. What do you do with parking garages, right?
Well, right. Well, and
people are making money on their cars.
Yeah. Look, my crystal ball doesn't work any better than anyone else's, but it goes back to my argument that, there are people who are going to go, oh, I don't want autonomous vehicles. Stop the autonomous vehicles. Guess what? You can't stop them.
Right.
So let's manage them.
Yeah.
It's change. That kind of change is inevitable.
Right.
So let's manage it in a way that's the most beneficial for the community. And by making the argument about to change or not to change, we totally miss that opportunity.
Right. It's the same way you can't tell, we can't turn off Silicon Beach. You can't say, hey, are you fit into this tech company type? Okay, no, you can't do business here. And if you have friends who are also doing, tech companies, they can't come here and do business either. We have to turn off Silicon Beach. Certain things just are the way they are.
Well, yeah, people...
For better or for worse.
Right. Well, let me give you a different example because I know technology is very controversial, but healthcare. Santa Monica, the largest employers, maybe besides the local government, is the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
We have 2 wonderful hospitals here. Now, what comes with those hospitals? Medical offices. Medical offices are huge traffic generators because in any given hour you have 3 or 4 people going into each individual office, right? And a lot of them are getting there by driving. It's one of the most intense traffic generators you can imagine. You have a lot of people coming into town, right? You have doctors, nurses, and it's interesting. People think, well, but they're all, doctors and nurses. No, most of the people who work in hospitals are people who are doing administrative work, people who are cleaning the rooms. These are not people who can afford to live in Santa Monica unless we do something about our housing prices. So people say, well, then maybe we shouldn't have the healthcare industry. Maybe we shouldn't have hospitals in town. And let me tell you this.
That's quite a trade-off.
Right. If it's your loved one who's having a heart attack and is in an ambulance, you want that hospital 5 blocks from you. You don't want to have to cross the 405 freeway to get to UCLA. So that's what we need to get people thinking about. Again, it goes back to the what's in it for me. What's in it for you is when you need that hospital, you're going to be damn glad it's so close.
That's like any public service or private service. So when there's something that you, and insurance is a similar concept where no one likes paying insurance, right? But it's there when you need it.
Exactly.
And you don't know when that is. That's the whole purpose, and you're glad you had it.
Yeah.
When you do.
No, so for me, it's about, thinking, doing a little more critical thinking about these things and saying, okay, there are trade-offs with every decision we make. Some good things come from it, some bad things come from it. But overall, going again back, I keep harping on this, what's best for the community as a whole It is a fabulous asset that Santa Monica has 2 world-class hospitals within our relatively small borders.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who had a son who played all sorts of games and participated in athletics,
it was useful.
I was very, in those emergency rooms quite frequently,
Yeah.
and I was doggone glad they were there. But no, I think that's it, is that it's, we get the same kind of conversation, something completely different about the college.
Yeah.
When the college was in session, all these people coming to classes at the college, and they're not even Santa Monicans. They're coming from the region. They're coming internationally. They're international students. Isn't that awful? And I'm like, no, that's great. We have this incredible resource that generates all this programming that is available to Santa Monicans. I mean, on any given night, again, pre-COVID, and hopefully post-COVID, you can go to Santa Monica College and there's an interesting lecture or some sort of, play or dance theater or something. There's something really interesting going on there. And that's happening in our community because we have this vibrant educational institution.
Right.
Does it create inconvenience for us? Of course it does.
Right.
I always tell people traffic, used to be a huge issue pre-COVID, and I would say, well, there's 2 ways to solve traffic. One is congestion pricing. In cities like Santa Monica, London, Singapore, Helsinki, a lot of cities have done congestion pricing, and it has alleviated traffic to some extent. The other thing is economic downturn. So if you want to be Detroit, we can get rid of traffic. But if you're going to have vibrant institutions, if you're going to have an exciting city with options to go to grab a coffee, get a dinner, go to the theater, that sort of thing, when you have a vibrant, desirable city, people want to come to it, and until we figure out better ways to move people around, they're going to come in cars, and that's going to create traffic. So everything in governance is about choices, and the question is, how do we make those choices? And I keep circling back because I'm a really boring person, which is, for me, in analyzing those choices is what's best for the community as a whole. And I tell people I would gladly sit in 10 minutes more of traffic every day of my life for the rest of my life if by doing so I knew that every person who lived in Santa Monica had secure housing, access to good health care, secure access to food, a wonderful education, and the opportunity to thrive. I'll take 10 minutes out of my day and sit in traffic for that.
Right. Oh, well said. So when you talk about choices, this is interesting because when I see people vote on policy or anytime you have to pick one thing over another, you're always giving up one thing. It's a cost benefit, right? And you're doing some sort of risk analysis to determine what are we going to put forth here that's going to create a great thing for people, and what are the risks and what are the alternatives, and can we pursue those alternatives? Now, if you looked at the matrix of that decision making, if you had to put that in a table, right, and view it down, and be like, oh, okay, so this is the reasons they said yes, and this is the reason they said no, and that's why the policy is done the way it is. Okay, now you may not like it, but you should understand the rationale, right? Often things are never that clear. No, there's never a table. You're like, oh, those are the reasons yes, and these are the reasons. It's hard to, and then think about those, while you're either upset about a decision or whatever. But it always occurred to me that even when you're voting on something, right? If I have to make a decision, I know that there was alternative choices, and I may not be 100% in love with the choice that I made, but given a lot of people that were weighing in on it, you have to balance certain things. That was the outcome that happened, and I'm okay with that outcome. I was okay with giving up some of those things. It doesn't mean I love the exact thing all the time, but that's the way it ended up, and that's what the democracy created, and we have to accept that. To me, that takes like a radical acceptance approach to sometimes be able to do that, and it's hard to do, but it feels to me that there's a gap in, like, just to bring it back a little bit, that instead of looking at it that approach, there tends to be this idea that corruption is the reason they made that decision, right? And to what degree that happens in politics, I don't know. And at which level that starts becoming really serious, I'm sure it happens at some level. But if that information was provided, I'd have to imagine people would go, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And then if in that table we highlighted the things we all tend to agree on, hey, we all agree that like we can't draw a fence around Santa Monica, right? Okay, cool, check. So that's part of the decision-making process, given that consensus. So I suppose what I'm thinking is, how can we make that more clear to people, that these choices are hard, that there really is a lot of work and thought, and it's not all selfish, it's not all corrupt, there's a real matrix of decision-making here. And if that is the case, what do we need to do to convey that to make people feel better, that to make it a trustful place for people, for our public?
I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
I mean, no, I mean, we have certain structures that are designed to make governance more transparent. The Brown Act, the Ralph Brown Act, not the anybody else Brown Act or the Color Brown Act, it's the Ralph Brown Act. And it says that we have to do the public's business in public with certain limited exceptions. And that's really key. And so you have city council meetings where the hope is that people are discussing why they're voting a particular way. Look, I've been on the short end of some 6-1 votes, and that's okay. I think one of the important things that we can as council members do to try and restore that trust is give reasons for why we vote the way we do, so that people can see that we've thought it out. In other words, you say, okay, here's why I'm voting this way, here are the reasons why. At least you go, okay, they've given me some arguably rational, they may not be reasons I agree with. We talk about cost-benefit analysis. That is not black or white, because both cost and benefits are always value-laden, right?
Right.
What may be a benefit to you is incredibly valuable to me, and I don't care, right? So you never can create sort of an objective standard and say, this is the way to do, this is what we should do. So there's always going to be room for disagreement, which is fine. It is fine. I am perfectly happy being on the short end of 6-1 votes, but I have the opportunity to stay in public why I'm voting the way I did, and that's important. And I think if each of us explains, this is why I'm voting the way I did, people can go, okay, I don't think that's a very good reason, or okay, now that you put it that way, I think it's a good reason. People can sort of see the process, the cost-benefit analysis happening at the institutional level, maybe not at the individual level. So I think there's that. And our institutions, we file a lot of forms. It's Form 700 season, which means we all have to file our forms that say where we get income from. Those forms are public, so people can look at our forms and see who's my employer. I work for AT&T, so when anything that comes up relating to telecommunications, I recuse myself, even if it's not an AT&T question, if it's a Verizon or a Frontier question, because whatever policy we're making inherent in that decision may somehow benefit AT&T somewhere down the road, and I just don't want to get caught in that. So we do a lot of disclosure. When we're doing quasi-judicial hearings, we're required to disclose any ex parte, out of the public's eye conversations we had with the parties who are in it. And a quasi-judicial would be like an appeal of a landmark decision or certain kinds of land use planning. So there are a lot of processes and opportunities for us to tell the public, here's who's giving us money, here's who's not giving us money. All of our campaign donors are disclosed in the elections process. And we have the opportunity to explain ourselves from the dais. And I think we should avail ourselves of all of those. So I think the bigger problem, and I don't know how to say this nicely, so maybe I'll be a little not nice, okay, is that we all, again, think, I call it the not invented here problem. That if I didn't think this, if I didn't invent this idea, it can't be good. And so if you say, this is what I believe, and I believe that this is so the only thing a rational person could believe, then by definition you're saying the person who disagrees with you is irrational or corrupt. And that's what we need to get off of. We need to get off the idea that there is one right answer and there is only one way that any quote-unquote good person could come out on an issue. And look, there are some things where it is very black and white. voting rights.
Right.
Voting rights to me. Everybody should be able to vote. We should do nothing to impinge on people's ability to vote, and we should do everything we can to encourage
something that most people would agree with.
Right, exactly. Or things relating to the well-being of people. I feel very strongly, and I've been doing some work with some people about, the proliferation of weapons in our society, and how it breaks my heart. When I was young, I'm old enough to remember doing earthquake drills and nuclear drills, getting under my desk as if somehow my little kindergarten desk was going to protect me from a nuclear bomb. But we did them, and now they're doing active shooter drills. That's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking. So I think there are some things we can agree on, but whether or not, that building across the street should be torn down.
Yeah.
And if you say it should not be torn down, but if you think it should be torn down, the only reason that you can think it should be torn down is because you're on the take, then there's nowhere for us to go.
Right.
Because you can't negotiate with corrupt. Or if you say I'm stupid, because you can't negotiate with stupid.
Right.
But if you say, okay, you see some merit to that building, I don't see the merit. Let's agree to disagree. As Obama said, let's disagree without being disagreeable. We'll have a vote on the council. Someone will win, someone will lose.
Yep.
And the people who lose can't be resentful about it. Walk out and go, well, I lost that, so the next time I get a chance, I'm really going to stick it to those people.
Yeah.
You just have to say that's democracy in action.
Mm-hmm.
Look, sometimes the people I vote for president don't win.
Right.
And I don't say, okay, well, I'm moving to Canada. I say, it's democracy in action. And my job is to sort of continue to be politically active and hope that the next election, the person I want wins. So I think that's it. Is if we can accept that, we can disagree from a rational place. That we can both be rational actors, non-corrupt actors, and just have an honest disagreement. We may never get to agreement. That's okay. But democracy provides for a vote. We'll have the vote, and then the person who loses says, okay, I lost that vote, maybe I'll win the next one. And the person who wins doesn't gloat and go, oh, look, see, I was right. Says, okay, I won that vote, maybe I'll lose the next one. And then all of a sudden we're talking in a much more civil, professional, our mayor, unfortunately, has been taking some hits for asking people to be civil, as though somehow being uncivil, is a good thing. And look, I am a First Amendment person. I've done a lot of work in my day job as a First Amendment lawyer. And I believe people have a right to come to council and they can call us any name they want. They can say whatever they want. We knew the job was dangerous when we took it. But they have to understand that by being, when you're uncivil to people, that it buries your argument.
Right.
Right? If you're, I always tell people, it's amazing how people will come to you and they'll start out, and I've had this happen many times. You're corrupt, you're on the take, so-and-so has bought you, you only care about this, blah, blah, blah. Now I would like you to vote with me on this issue. Well, I'm already in my little human brain going, whoa, I'm not hearing the second part. If you want to persuade me that you're in the right, calling me stupid or corrupt in the first instance isn't the best way to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so while you're certainly entitled to do it, and I am required to take it, if your goal is to try and accomplish something rather than insulting me, you're not doing it the best way. It's the old, you catch a lot more flies with honey than vinegar sort of thing.
Right.
And I will tell you, at our Housing Commission meeting last night, someone used a horrible epithet about one of our commissioners from the public, just screamed it out. And I'm sure they were very upset. That caused them to do it. They had a right to do it. But now when that person comes and takes their 2 minutes to speak, what do you think that commissioner is going to think about what they say?
Yeah.
No matter how well thought out it is, no matter how meritorious it is, they're going to be looking at that person and go, you're the one that called me that horrible
And
epithet.
no matter how objective you can be, the fact that happened makes it very challenging for anyone to be like, wait a second, you're the person who just called me that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, we're all human beings.
Yeah.
We're not automatons. So if people call us names and accuse us of things, we can't help but have it color or what they then say. So someone could say something incredibly rational, incredibly well thought out, but we're still thinking, oh, but you're the one that called me that terrible name, or you're the one who accused me of being corrupt. So civility is it's not about making me feel better, but it's about having a better discourse about the issues. That if we can speak to each other in a more civil manner, then we can take all that extraneous stuff, that name calling out of it. And now I'm listening to what you have to say from a substantive level and not focused on, oh, you're the person that thinks I'm a moron.
Right.
Right? And so I'm not trying to censure anybody. They can use whatever tactic they want. They can, and I will say,
But the reality is, if you yell at people, the people are less likely to listen to you.
Yeah.
First, they have to absorb your yelling.
Right, and we're all humans. I mean, I will tell you, my family has been attacked in my time on the council. Horrible things have been said about my son and my husband, and I always tell them both, I knew the job was dangerous when I took it, and unfortunately, you're stuck with me. But I think what's important for people who have been on the, it's okay to be uncivil. And look, we just had Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He wrote about the need to be uncivil. But when he was talking about being uncivil, he meant about things like civil disobedience. In other words, you say, I can't sit at that lunch counter, I'm sitting at that lunch counter. But it's clear when you read his writings, when you listen to his speeches, he never debased himself or diluted or obscured his message with name calling.
Right.
And I think that's the difference.
That's the worst.
You have
name
an
calling
absolute First Amendment right to call people names. You have an absolute First Amendment right to, I had someone, and I will use this word because this is the word they use, called my son retarded.
Oh,
because he was,
terrible.
he's your son, so he must be retarded, someone told me once. And they had an absolute First Amendment right to say that. But then when they come to me and say, and here's how I want you to vote on this issue, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to process that? So that is, to me, you have a First Amendment right to do it, but if you're trying to be an effective advocate, think about, is that really the effective way to do it? And so when we talk about civility, that is a shorthand way of talking about this conversation you and I are having. We're not trying to censure anyone or tell them they can't be upset. They want to elevate their voice, that is fine. But understand that that's the effect you're having.
Yeah.
So that to me, when we talk about civility, if we can just be done with the name calling, if we can just be done with the unsupported allegations of corruption, if we can just be done with the things that make it difficult, that these are barriers to having that conversation, I think we can go far.
Well, there's an emotional intelligence factor to this as well, right? Where if you come in with that attitude, there's something that's missing there that's saying, I'm trying to get something done here, right? What you said was really powerful, and obviously I sort of want to breathe into that for a second. But I suppose it feels like there's an opportunity in council to take some of these values and perhaps start with that. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, what you just said was so, real about how people think in reality of decision making, and if people would know before they stepped up there to come communicate that, well, first of all, calling people names is a childish, period. Like, I don't know if anyone would disagree with it. If you probably raise your hand and say, is it childish to call people mean names? You'd probably say, yeah, most people would probably agree. But maybe, do you think it would be helpful to at the beginning of controversial issues, lay out some of these principles potentially? Maybe start with, open the dialogue with, okay, here are the things we all agree on.
Yeah, our mayor has tried to do that, and she's been criticized quite heavily for it. I'll say one of the saddest days on the council, and Kevin McEwen and I didn't agree on everything, but when he left and we, thanked him for his service, we had people who called in and spent their 2 minutes insulting him. And they're certainly entitled to do that, but why? What was the point? And I think that's it, is there's this meanness, this ugliness. Now, I will be honest and say I think each and every one of us as council members need to do a better job of modeling good behavior, both on the dais and off the dais. And I try and work on that. I am imperfect, and I try and work on that as well, and be more thick-skinned and a little more respectful in dealing with people and, as you say, avoid the quick and easy temptation of name calling and things like that. But I think we need to model better behavior. I think, we can ask people to follow that model, to also be, I think one of the things, for example, we need to tell not just our boards members and commissioners, but the people who are civically engaged, that we want to make Santa Monica not just a model city from an infrastructure standpoint or a built environment standpoint or a mobility standpoint, but let's make it a model democratic society. We talk so much and we hear on the news every day, these pundits get on and talk about democracy is dying, democracy is threatened, There was an attempted coup, there's going to be another attempted coup, they're trying to keep us all from voting. What if we took our little 8 square miles and said, you know what? Let's be a model for what there can be. Let's have respectful, honest discourse, which will include disagreements, but show that this is what democracy can function like. It isn't about trying to keep people from voting. It isn't about insulting people. It isn't about, creating an environment where people are polarized. You're in your corner, I'm in my corner, and never the twain shall meet.
Right.
And maybe if we just said, this is our goal, that we're going to try and make Santa Monica a model for the way that democratic processes can work, and it's admittedly on a very small local level, but sometimes it's those small local things that catch fire. And if people say, well, if Santa Monica can do it, we can do it too. And that was really, a lot of the well-being work we did, which sort of got nipped in the bud by COVID, sadly, came from the fact that a lot of people, people who are thinking about these issues, think that we're not going to make our society better from top down. It's too polarized. We have 24/7 news media that are looking for disputes and looking for disagreements. We have social media, that's a whole nother hour to talk about. And that we're never going to be able to sort of reconstruct, that golden age of democracy, if you want to call it that, from the top down, because there's too much at stake at the top. But maybe if we can do it in small pockets like Santa Monica, maybe like some small town in Alabama, some small town in Illinois, whatever, if we can start to see it and it becomes a groundswell and it builds from the ground up, maybe there's really hope for us. There is hope for democracy. Maybe we just need, the interesting thing is you can accomplish the most at a small level and then scale up. It's much harder, it's more daunting to attack it at the larger level. So maybe we can do some work there.
It would be interesting. I'll say this: it would be hard to imagine that it's not possible, right? Mm-hmm. That to me would be hard to imagine. There's things that are been done in society that seem way more impossible. Automated cars is one of them. Self-driving cars, satellites, things that are like, just marvels in technology that we all take advantage of. Talking to someone face to face across the world in real time. This seemed impossible 50 years ago. So to think that in a small level we can create a place where people can actively listen to one another and hear each other and appreciate the disagreement, even though you're not always going to get what you want. Mm-hmm. Taking some of those values and putting them forth, it feels like it is possible. So I'm hopeful.
Well, I think we all have to be hopeful, because the minute you lose hope, then what's the point? Mm-hmm. Pete Buttigieg said that running for office is an act of optimism, is an act of hope, it's an act of faith that things can get better. And he's absolutely right. If you enter politics, whether it's running for office or just being an engaged member of the community, you are at some fundamental level expressing your hope that things can get better. Because if you didn't think things could get better, you would disengage completely. And so I think maybe that's the common ground we all find, that the reason we're all at this table yelling at each other, calling each other names, being rude, is because we all care.
Right.
And we all think things can be better. And maybe if we just agree on that sort of fundamental thing, maybe we can incrementally start to build.
Start there, and then get to the next layer, right. The onion.
Yeah, I think that's it, because like I said, there are people in this community I know who've never voted for me for city council who think that every decision I've made is wrong. There was a famous quote from William O. Douglas, who was probably the most liberal member of the Supreme Court we've ever had, U.S. Supreme Court. And at the end of his service, he sat on the court with William Rehnquist, who was obviously very conservative, appointed by Nixon. And Justice Douglas was getting on in years, and some people thought he was losing some of his faculties. And someone confronted him about that and said, you know, these are complex issues. How do you know how to vote? And he said, well, I find out whatever Rehnquist is thinking, and I vote the opposite way. and at some point you're like, ooh, but at another point you're like, okay, but they were both on the Supreme Court, so maybe that's it. There are people in this town who know whatever Gleam Davis thinks is a good idea, I think the opposite. And that's okay. I really want to make it clear, that's okay. But if we can understand that you and I both care, if you can accept that I'm not corrupt, I'm not doing this because I'm making some money, trust me, if I was making money off of being on city council, I would live in a nicer place, I would drive a nicer car, you know, that if you can accept that the reason I'm doing what I'm doing and you're doing what you're doing and everyone else is doing what they're doing, again, at this large table, to use a metaphor that we'll call, you know, the public square, that we're all in the public square because we care, maybe that's the first place we find common ground. It's just acknowledge that I'm here because I want to make Santa Monica better. You're here because you want to make Santa Monica better. We may not agree on anything else.
Yeah.
But if we can at least both agree that we want to make Santa Monica better, that's a start.
That's a start. Yeah. It's a good start.
Yeah.
I think it's a good start. It's just like, okay, can we, and before they, I guess the way I see it is like before they even speak, to acknowledge that. Go, oh, okay, so we're both, I'm going to come to you with a different approach, right? It's usually not the thing that people disagree, the thing itself, it's the approach, right? Everyone wants everyone to be healthy from COVID. No one wants anyone to die, but people think there's different approaches of how it's been handled and whatever it is. Everyone wants homelessness to be solved, but people think there's different ways that this should be done. And on top of the, you know, that fundamental, I think you laid it out perfectly. We both care, right? Yes. Okay, perfect. So now I'll tell you my approach. Now you tell me your approach, and then we can weigh the approaches.
Yeah. No, look, you know, if you're looking for common ground, it's sometimes hard to find, and maybe it's just at most fundamental level. You know, I do think that what, for me, is the promise of Santa Monica. We have tremendous assets in this city. Some of them are natural, the beach, the fact that we have mountains that we can go hiking in so close, that we have this beautiful weather. I moved to Santa Monica because I grew up on the east side of town, and my memory of growing up was literally having air you could see. The smog was so bad, and I always wanted to move to Santa Monica because of the ocean breeze, and you didn't have that issue. So we have these tremendous natural assets. We also have this tremendous set of assets we call our people. We have an artistic community that is unparalleled, I believe, anywhere in the nation. Pick another. I mean, yeah, people say, oh, Taos, New Mexico, or, you know, Sedona. I'm like, no, come to Santa Monica. Come to Santa Monica. We have an artistic community. We have a tech community that is working on building the future. We have a healthcare community that is working to make us all healthier and live longer. We have this just tremendous group of people who are all trying to make something better, do something, which is, if you think about it, amazing. And you layer sort of on top of that a culture, a Santa Monica culture that says we're willing to be on the leading edge. We're willing to take the shot to the chin, you know, to be the person who sticks our chin out there and says, no, this is important, you know, whether it's the work we're going to do to try and protect the environment, the work we're going to do to try and create a better education for our kids. There's no community that I know of in the United States of America that takes their general fund revenues from their city and gives more than $2,500 per pupil to every kid in our public schools. That's amazing. That isn't something people did because, oh, it makes me look good. They did it because they understood investing in education is key to making us a stronger community, key to giving us a better future. And so every kid that's going to a Santa Monica public school we're investing in them in a way nobody else is. So when you sort of take those natural assets, the people assets, and then that culture that says everybody should have a secure home, that people who aren't as economically well off as others, we should take care of them. We should create our own local safety net, which we have done through our POD program, which subsidizes older people who are spending a disproportionate amount of their money in rent, through our other programs, which provide subsidies, the Virginia Avenue Food Pantry for people who are food insecure. I mean, you just look at every day, we are doing things that are an expression of our culture. And if you start to build on that, and you're going, wait a minute, look at all of this. This is great. And the thing I want to remind people about, 90%, more than 90% of the votes we take at City Council are unanimous votes. We spend 90% arguing about the other 10%.
Right.
90% of our time is spent about the other 10%, and that's okay. That's how it should be. But what that tells you is that we do have some fundamental agreements.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's, okay, let's just buy that backhoe, it's the best backhoe, or whether we should, that's the right thing to do from a sustainability standpoint or whatever. 90% of our votes are unanimous. So we're not disagreeing about every little thing. We're disagreeing about some of the big stuff, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's where our time is spent. But when you think about the natural assets, the people, the culture, would you want to live anywhere else? You know, no matter what you think about Santa Monica, no matter what you have to complain about, and look, we all have things that we would like to see changed within the city, but at the end of the day, where else would you live? This is to me a place that is unparalleled, and I've had the fortune of traveling around the world. I've lived in various parts of the country, and this is where my heart is.
Well, thank you. That was lovely to hear, and it was beautifully said, and I think that should cap today.
Okay, good.
Yeah. that was I think that was perfect. Anything else after this would be not nearly as good as that.
Well, thanks for having me.
It was good seeing you.
Thanks for having me. It's always great talking to you, and hope to have these conversations. One conversation never solves everything, but many conversations will.
That's right. Thanks for being here, and thanks for for being real with everything going on.
Yeah. Hey, I showed up in my workout clothes. How much more real could I be?
Thanks, Gleam.
All right. Thanks, Evan.